Bruchko by Bruce Olson, Chapter 12. An Impatient Wait. The jungle seemed strangely quiet and serene after a month in Bogota. I established a camp near the bank of a small stream and waited for the Motelones to find me. The camp was near the juncture of 3 different Motelone trails, and I knew that I wasn't far from a Motelone home, but it would have been dangerous to go walking up to it. Instead, I left gifts on the trails for the Motelones to find. My supplies were luxurious compared to my previous jungle equipment. I had a plastic tarp to keep off the night rain and enough food to last me a week or more. I even had 3 books: a Bible, Dr. Zhivago and the Red Cloth Great Jungle, an anthropological adventure with the Yuko Indians. I was quite pleased with myself. Soon I would be back with the Motelones, I thought. In the meantime, I could enjoy the jungle, do some reading, and rest. Civilization was far behind me. From the River of Gold, where the oil company's territory ended, a farmer had guided me upriver as far as he dared. Then I had walked back into a jungle, repeatedly losing my way, backtracking, and trying to make sense out of the indistinct, tangled Indian trails. Finally, I had settled on my camping place. Every day I checked the gifts I laid out on the trails. I draped a long piece of red cloth across branches on one trail, tied small bags of sugar and salt to trees, and left 3 malachite lying flat on another trail. They lay flat because when the Motelones declared war, I had been told by one of the oil company executives, by sticking their arrow points down in the trail. I wanted no confusion. I came in peace. Checking all the gifts took a good part of each day, since it required fighting through the branches and vines that covered the trails. After doing that, I would return to my camp. It was on a knoll, underneath a mahogany tree whose roots jutted out like the flying buttresses of a cathedral. It was a comfortable place, except for the bugs. I usually fished in the afternoon, cooked some food on the fire I kept going, then read. A week went by, then 2 weeks. There were no signs that the gift had been touched. The week stretched into a month. My food was gone. The jungle seemed oppressive. The scream of animals often kept me awake at night. I knew that tigers were stalking prey out in the dark. Sometimes, hearing an animal scream, I would shiver. During the day, the high trees dripped water and looked dark and somber. I wished I could see the sun through the jungle growth. There was a frightening sense of quietness, as though my approach made all the jungle hush up, as though any spoken word would echo endlessly in the stillness. Sometimes, to relieve the silence, I would stand and yell phrases in all the languages I can think of. I began to doubt whether my gifts would ever get results. Each day when I rounded a corner on the trail, I expected to see some change. Each day they were just the way I'd left them. I grew impatient. After struggling several hours to get to the gifts, I would merely glance at them with disgust and leave. I had read my books over and over and was tired of them. I wanted something to happen. My impatience seemed ridiculous. Here, I had committed my whole life to the Motelones, and I couldn't stand a few weeks waiting comfortably in the jungle. What was the hurry? As all such rational considerations aside, however, I was ecstatically happy when, after 2 months, I found that my gifts were gone. I could hardly believe it. I checked to see that it was really the same place, but there was no doubting it. I knew the location as well as I knew by hand. I could describe every branch of every tree. The gifts had been taken. I put out more gifts. The next day they were gone too. Again I set out gifts. The next day they were replaced by a bow and arrow. That was a great step forward. They were willing to exchange gifts. This time I decided to put out gifts and stay nearby to see if they would take them from me personally. I felt sure that there were eyes in the jungle were watching me. I wanted to see them. I sat down on the trail and waited. Hours went by. I saw and heard nothing. I had my fishing equipment with me, and there was a stream nearby, so I decided to fish. I'd probably hear them if they came to take the gifts. When I got back from fishing, the gifts were gone. In their place were 4 long arrows stuck into the ground, point down. It was the Motelone warning. I should run for my life. But if I ran now, I'd probably never see them again. My months and years would be wasted. My commitment would be an empty phase of my life. So I got down on my knees and prayed. It seemed the most logical thing to do. When I stood up, I got an idea. I pulled the arrows out of the ground one by one and laid them flat. Then I took some gifts and laid them on top. Perhaps I would convince them they came in peace. As I started walking back to my camp along the trail. As I went, I found more symbols. There was a white shirt cut and torn to shreds. Further along the trail, I found a matted group, cut open, with dirt rubbed inside. What did these things mean? The motelones cut my body open and rubbed dirt inside. Then they cut me up in ribbons. I had a rustling of other brush. I stopped and listened. The rustling stopped too. It's my imagination, I thought. I started walking again. But there were definite sounds near the trail. I was being followed. I searched the thick green vegetation with my eyes. I could see nothing. I continued to walk, looking around me constantly, expecting to feel an arrow sizzle into my back. I remembered a Motilone phrase that I had learned when I was with them before. I was fairly sure that meant, "Come here." I yelled at the Indians. "Wayada ka dobuichi. Wayada ka da dobuichi." After I shouted several times, I heard the rustling noise again, this time retreating from me, back into the jungle. Then there was silence. Later I learned that dobuichi kubi means "you lazy ones of no value," so that I was yelling, "Come here, you lazy, worthless people." But I didn't know that then. I didn't know what I had done. 2 months of waiting had been turned into nothing by a stupid mistake that I couldn't even identify. I felt horribly frustrated. My hopes that had been so high that morning disappeared. I began to run on the trail back to my camp, slashing through thorn bushes and vines. All I wanted to do was get out of that place. I had had it with the Indians. They were stupid and irrational. So I ran, panting furiously, but not even feeling the fatigue. All the loneliness of the past few months came out. I felt the bushes tear my hands and face, but it almost felt good. I wanted to leave, to forget the Indians. I broke into the clearing of my camp and started panting for a moment. Then I seized my axe and ran down to the water. I began to chop at a balsa wood tree. I would make a raft and float out of there. I worked at a frenzy. Soon the tree swayed and came crashing down into the river. Immediately I moved to a second, driving the axe bite deep into the tree. It too fell. I moved to a third. Then I looked up. There were the motelones, 6 of them, their bowstrings taut. Without thinking, I dropped my axe and hid behind a tree. I peered out at them. They didn't seem to have any inclination to kill me. They were just waiting, holding their bows ready. I stepped out from behind the tree. I held my hands, showing that they were empty. My anger was gone. I watched their face for some time, my hands shaking slightly. Slowly, they relaxed their bows. One of them stepped forward. He was pigeon-toed. I looked more closely at his face. He had a small scar on the side of his mouth. I smiled at him, hoping that he'd recognize me. He returned my smile. I smiled more broadly. So did he. He knew me. He spoke a word to the other men. They relaxed. Then he broke into the big, long laugh that I had known him for the other side of the mountains. He had been the only friendly person there, and now I found him here, hundreds of miles away. The men began talking to each other. I could tell that they weren't angry. They didn't even seem to watch me too closely. Then the man with the laugh motioned to me to follow them, and we set off. This time there were no spears in my back. When we reached the communal home, I caused a great commotion. Motelones crowded around me, poking, rubbing. They seemed most interested in the hair on my arms and legs. I noticed before that the motelones didn't have any. One young fellow touched my arm, then took some of the thick blonde hair between his fingers and pulled it out. "Ouch," I said. The pain was excruciating. But he just laughed, and all the others laughed with him. They pulled on my shirt and shorts as though they weren't sure whether they were part of my body. They punched me and kneaded my muscles. More of my hair was pulled out. It hurt, but they were obviously having a good time. So then I had to laugh myself. I was exhilarated. They weren't going to hurt me. I had made contact again. Once again, I had an opportunity to reach the motelones. That night I was given food, then a hammock in which to sleep. The hammock hung so high in the rafters that it took several tries to get up in it. The first time I tried, I fell, and everyone laughed. But I made it up and, feeling a little insecure, tried to relax. The hammock swayed slightly. Looking at the ceiling, I studied the familiar curved rafters. Then I saw what looked like a small mouse coming down one of the hammock ropes toward me. It had an odd, flat shape for an animal. When it ran to within an arm's length, I saw that it was a huge cockroach, perhaps 5 inches long. I gave a little shriek and knocked it to the ground. No one else seemed to notice. I lay back in the hammock and laughed nervously. The house became quiet. I heard only an occasional fragment of the sing-song, explosive language of the motelones. Soon, I thought, I'll understand that.